Health has become one of the most important and prevalent conversations in modern day society, and yet, collectively, we are sicker than ever before. Tennielle O'Callaghan is a women's health coach and nutrition and movement expert who is dedicated to changing that. But Tennielle is more than just a coach. She is dedicated to helping people achieve their dreams and get the most out of their lives through educating and guiding them on one of life's most foundational principles: food. Over the last year and a half, I've witnessed Tennielle passionately give her time, energy, and wisdom to my life partner Hayley as they work together on Hayley's own personal health journey. Not only have I witnessed firsthand the incredible results, I've also seen how much Tennielle cares about the work she does and the women she works with. You probably think that you know quite a lot about food, as did I, and I hope you do. But this conversation invites you to think about your relationship with food as a building block for all of your relationships, with yourself, with your creativity, and with the world. We also talk about embracing the unknown as a path to success, being of service, and how men can best support the important women in their lives as they go through their personal health journeys. I hope you find this episode of the Journey podcast as beautiful and valuable as I did. Tennielle, welcome to the Journey. Thanks so much for being here on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
It's my pleasure. I am too, particularly because you're the first person with an Australian accent, apart from myself, to be on the Journey podcast, and that seems quite a moment for me, at least right now.
Oh, that's nice. I actually find I enjoy other accents more, and I forget that I even have one to other people. So,
Of course, we don't have an accent. Everybody else has an accent,
Mm.
but I should warn my predominantly North American listeners, many hundreds of thousands of them, who are definitely going to download this the moment it airs, that I might have more of an Australian accent than I usually do because I'm talking to another Australian. So just a bit of a disclaimer there.
I'll be drawing it out of you.
I'm sure you will. So, gut health, lots to talk about, and it's a topic that doesn't seem to go out of fashion, unfortunately. I think gut health kind of popped onto my radar about 12 years ago, and perhaps we can touch on the personal experience there. But I've actually, since we had a quick call about a week ago, I've been dying to ask you. We collectively know more, I would argue, about gut health now than we ever have before, as you know, as a society. And yet, from what I see, gut health has perhaps never been in greater need of improvement individually and collectively. And I'm curious where the disconnect is there, in your opinion.
Okay. So, in my opinion, I would say that over time, gut health has deteriorated because of a number of things. Like a lot of that is pesticide use and sprays on foods has like the quality of food that we're eating now and I guess the chemicals that are in food now are more prevalent than, well, the quality has lessened and the chemicals are more prevalent than ever before. So it's just meant that there's a lot for our bodies to deal with when we're eating now. And there's also a lack of nutrient quality in food. So we don't have the tools and resources as much, within ourselves to be dealing with those things. So I would say the biggest disconnect at the moment has just been convenience foods over time, farming practices over time has just deteriorated, gut health overall. And then unfortunately, our medical system hasn't really been, educated to understand gut health so much as chronic illness. So it kind of feels like doctors and there's no mistaking doctors save lives and they really help a lot of people, but they spend a lot of their time in study like learning how to deal with chronic illness and acute illness and disease. And so there's that gap between the point where someone starts to feel unwell and they've developed that chronic disease. And I feel like a lot of doctors go through training, and when they're in their training, like it's grueling. If you've ever looked into the training to become a doctor, I respect all doctors who have made it through. It's like 10, 11 years or something plus training, and it's really stressful and quite isolating being moved around for rounds and things like that to practice. But in that time, like doctors are spending time with a lot of really, really sick people and people that are, suffering from multiple chronic diseases. And so I guess from my perspective as a gut health coach, is that when doctors are coming out the other end of all that training and someone might walk into their office and say, I have a tummy ache, you know, they're like, okay, well, this isn't, quite that bad yet, but they also don't have the tools to navigate the between stages, because it's like an average of under an hour of nutrition training in a medical degree. So there's just that gap, I think, at the moment, where it's a multitude of things that have happened over time, with the heavy sprays and pesticides, food quality deteriorating, lots of ultra processed foods that affect the health of the gut, and then not there being a gap in the medical system where the tools just aren't there to support people. So I think that was a very long answer to what you asked, but that to me is like my little zoom out lens on what has potentially happened over time that's created more gut health issues than ever before, and then that combined with culture and the busyness of life and additional stress on the body, and stress being a big driver for gut health issues as well. It's just, been quite a little concoction that's happened over time and created some issues.
We're in the business of long answers here on the Journey podcast, so I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm like, is there going to be a short answer for everything? I don't think so.
No, neither do I. Basically, what you said there is how it was my personal experience with quote unquote gut health some years ago. When I was 21, I started getting cramps in my gut, like quite painful cramps and some bloating, and I went to a doctor about it. And they asked me a few questions about what I ate, which as a 21-year-old, I ate very little that was good for me. Guilty. And they said, the doctor I said at the time, I saw at the time, said something along the lines of, it's either gluten intolerance or it's IBS. And this was the first that I'd heard of IBS. And before long, and this will be many people's story, I received that feedback enough that I took on this, I suppose, persona or this label of being a person who had IBS, and that one thing led to another, and then I tried various ways of dealing with that, and to absolutely no avail or no change, apart from I started to have these very carefully regulated rules of things that I could eat and couldn't eat, and eating things at certain times of day, and all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't until 13 years later that I finally made the link between what my guts were doing, my digestion, and what my body was doing, and other factors in my life like stress. And actually, it was a close friend of mine who said, oh, IBS is like 90% anxiety. And whether or not that's true or not, that was like the light bulb switch for me that just went bing, and it allowed me to start looking at this thing that I was experiencing not as a not as a label, not as a necessarily like a chronic disease, but just as an environmental, or partly an environmental piece. And I wonder if that is also part of the disconnect.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. IBS is basically it's a collection of symptoms that are occurring in the body, and it's been labeled as. I love that you use the word label, because essentially I feel like that's part of the problem as well. I could go off on a whole tangent on labels, and I kind of will, I think. But essentially IBS is a collection of symptoms that are occurring in the body that nobody knows what it is. There's no actual answer, and IBS isn't an answer. It's basically an umbrella. And so it's saying that all of these symptoms are occurring in the body, and we're just going to call it irritable bowel. There's your stomach is upset, like your digestive system's upset. And so if we give it a name, and then you have that label, that's essentially the answer. But it's actually not an answer, and it's not a solution, which is what you uncovered over time, was that, okay, well, now I know that I've got this label put on me. I have to create these conditions in my life to manage this label that I've essentially been told to attach to. And then someone's given you this, this little glimmer of hope that perhaps I don't have to live with this label. And that's, that stress is contributing, which is true. Stress is going to contribute to any issue that's happening in the body, but it definitely affects the gut health. And I would say that, or the health of digestion in general. And a big reason for that is because when we feel stressed, our nervous system is in, that fight or flight state. And when we're in a sympathetic state, our digestion halts. So saliva stops being produced, and certain like bile and stomach acid stops being produced. So we can't even digest the food that's coming in because our body's in a state of stress. And that simply just comes down to survival, right? Like if we're instinctually, if we were running from like a threat, or if there was a threat in our environment, that's not the time to digest and go to the toilet and rest and all of that kind of thing. So it's kind of like when we're given these labels, and unfortunately I think this is part of why I mean, I was previously, before I worked in women's health coaching and gut health coaching, I was a school teacher, but this is a huge reason why I left the education system too. It came down to labels. And I think too much we're being given a label now in life, and when we receive that label, we feel like, oh, that's the answer, and now I live my life by this label. And people aren't realizing, like, it's not a sentence, like it's going to give you some information, and it's important not to attach to that label. It's not disregarding all labels and saying they're not true. There was a lot of labels that were given to children in the classroom, but then I felt like people are going to now treat that person differently, and they essentially become their label and feel like, I'm different because I have this label. But it's really important to always be looking at how we can move beyond the label and how we can still thrive in spite of the label, and how we can potentially liberate ourselves from these labels and these sentences that we're essentially being given. And I don't think that it's any different with gut health, because there's a lot of gut health conditions that people are being labeled with, like Crohn's or any other IBD issues, and just even just things as simple as bloating being a symptom, where people are becoming that label and like, oh, I have bloating, like I'm bloated, or I just always bloat after I eat. Like it's just how they are. And in some sense, I worry that people are losing hope that there's something on the other side of that. And there actually is. And I think that's because potentially, going to see the doctor and having those conversations around symptoms that people are experiencing, until it gets to a certain point where it can be labeled, there's essentially no label to give it. So it's like, oh, you're fine, there's nothing wrong, or just eat this, or just eat that, or just avoid these foods, until it becomes something we can label, and then we'll be able to give you a solution, which comes in the form of medication or a surgery. Or it's never like an answer or a solution that's actually solving the issue or resolving the issue, where we can come back into balance. So I think your friend saying to you that stress is contributing, like that potentially liberated you in that moment, like maybe not wholeheartedly, but it showed you that there's possibility that there's something else going on here, and that I could maybe be free of this. Like people just need hope, I think. And I don't think enough hope is given that these sentences and these symptoms and these things we're experiencing in the body have the potential to go away, and that we can feel amazing and not experience these things anymore.
Yeah, most definitely. It was a permission slip that I received to unlabel myself. And there were moments, of course, when I thought, after 12 years of ongoing gut pain, that this was just who I was, or this was just how things are. And receiving that permission slip, that wasn't the end of it, but it was the pivot. And I think that's quite an important moment that hopefully more people can have, with working with people such as yourselves, who are helping to guide people toward their own form of kind of liberation from that. It's so interesting what you just said, about in the medical system. You basically said there is either nothing wrong with you or you're labeled. And like when I heard that, wow, that hit me where I live, because that is so, so true. The number of times either myself or, my partner Hayley, who you've worked with extensively, has seen a doctor and has just been told, well, our tests don't show anything, or there's nothing that we can see. And so this looks fine to me. And it's either that, or it's, you have this thing. There's no middle ground. And yet I regularly see a acupuncturist, and he won't give me a label. He's not going to tell me nothing's wrong either, but he won't give me a label. But what he will do is he'll say, okay, well, your heartbeat is perhaps a little he uses specific words, but like your energy is a little low, or we're in a building stage where we're working on rebuilding your energy levels and rebuilding you after having a sickness and stuff like that. There's no zero and there's no 100, but you're always on this scale in between. And it's like you're having, or he is having, a conversation with my body and my health, and he's inviting me to have that conversation with him.
Mm, that sounds absolutely beautiful. And I love that that's what he's doing. And I think there are a lot of practitioners out there now that are doing that, guiding people back to connecting with themselves essentially. And I think, that's what really drew me towards the work we're doing now is that my own journey was similar, right? Like I went to doctors, I went to specialists, I went to like gut health specialists, ENTs, all of that kind of thing, because I had my own gut health issues as well for years, like chronically for years. And probably the biggest moment where I was liberated from that was when someone brought awareness, a mentor of mine brought awareness to the language I was using around my symptoms. Like I was really identifying with my symptoms and the habits of my body. So things like I would say chronic constipation was my biggest one. And from as young as 8 years old, I can remember sitting on the bench crying to mum saying I was struggling to go to the toilet. And then that went on for a really, really long time until I was in my early 30s. And of course, my lifestyle habits weren't amazing in my 20s either. I went to uni and I definitely went all in, like with the uni experience, didn't hold back. And then I traveled around the world in my 20s. And so I was never really, even though mid 20s, my health journey definitely started then with my gut, I was still drinking alcohol. So whilst I moved to trying to include like lots of whole foods and started eating a little bit of organic food and all of that kind of thing, I was still heavily drinking every weekend, which is like super going to impact my gut health. And then as I moved into my 30s, I was really looking at, all aspects of my lifestyle and where I could improve, and finding that the medical system just wasn't giving me answers because I wasn't sick enough yet. And that's just because, things like getting your bloods tested with a doctor, they're using conventional ranges, which are based on the average of the population. And they're really, really broad. And you're not really out of range until something's seriously going wrong. And the average person is sick. Like 75% of Australians, I think it's up to 75%, are living with one chronic condition, and with something like 40% living with two or more chronic conditions. So that's who you're being measured against with conventional ranges, along with people in the age of 70, people from both genders. There's no real refinement to that. And so that's why when I learned about functional blood analysis, which is what we use for the basis of what we're doing, I really loved that because it's ranges based on what's healthy. And so it's not these really broad ranges. It's showing you when things are just starting to get out of balance. But whilst that's what can be weighed and measured, that's what's quantifiable, we know our bodies better than anyone. And so really, I think it's always about guiding us back to, and you were saying in your appointments, like you were being told, just invited to listen to your body and connect with your body. If we were all just to listen to our bodies and really start coming back to building a relationship with our bodies, a relationship with food, again, just like we would with our intimate partner, because essentially our relationship with food reflects our relationship with ourself, a relationship with eating, again, like just connecting to the process of eating instead of doing 100 other things while we're eating, or eating on the go, or eating something really quick that we could microwave, like just building relationships to all aspects of nourishing ourselves. Our digestion would improve drastically. And if there's those symptoms going on, digestive symptoms going on, instead of asking someone else to tell you why it's happening, ask yourself why it's happening. Like what have I just eaten that could have potentially caused this? How was I feeling when I ate? In some families, in some households, because it's so busy and there's so many people in the house, there can be a lot of drama right around meal times. And so if you're eating in that stressed state where perhaps you've had an argument with the kids or with your partner over not cooking something right or something like that, these things happen in the kitchen with partners. You could be asking yourself, am I even calm while I'm eating right now? And I think we seek answers. We go to the doctor because we're told from a young age. We get given little doctors' kits, and we watch TV shows with the doctors knowing all the answers. We watch movies where the doctors are saving people's lives. And as I said, I do believe they save lives and they can help. There's a point where it gets to where doctors are amazing at supporting. And I've seen some really great doctors in my time. But before it gets to that, people do need to be invited to connect with themselves and ask themselves, why am I feeling like this? What could have happened in my day that's created this unrest in my body? What am I consuming? Not just the food that I'm eating, which is affecting my digestion and my gut health and my cells and my body's ability to function, but what am I consuming on my social media that could be putting me in a stress state? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, right? Like, there's some pretty horrific things going on in the world. But if you're scrolling on your social media right before you're eating a meal or right after you finished eating and you're looking at this stuff, like, that's going to put your body in a state of stress and then affect digestion and affect your ability to be calm and relaxed and rest and all of those other things. So I think it's not just about finding someone like me or like a doctor or whoever who can measure what's going on in the body and ask you questions that invite you to connect. It's also just asking yourself, what am I eating that every day? What am I bringing in every day that could be potentially contributing to this? So, yeah, I mean, I can't even remember the question here. But I just, yeah, I think I love how you were saying that the person that it was the chiropractor that you said?
Acupuncturist.
Acupuncturist, yeah, your acupuncturist that invited you to just connect and wasn't trying to label anything going on, because essentially the symptoms are your body communicating with you. And so it's about connecting with yourself and asking, what in my life right now is creating this imbalance, is creating this unrest? Is it the food that I'm eating? Is it my relationships around me? Is it the job that I'm working? It's all of those things contribute to your body and how safe it feels and how well it functions.
It seems almost too easy that, and this is a generalization, and I know that it doesn't apply. Like, yeah, like the average of health, you can't apply that to the individual and expect it to work. But at base level, we're all walking around in society under threat, not from a lion that wants to eat us anymore, but from our boss or from our finances, or more existential, like wars and global warming and all that kind of stuff. And we're all really busy and rushing to work and not being mindful. And so it seems that the simplest and easiest solution is just to be mindful, to take a breath, to if you have space, to try to adjust your work-life balance, to be grateful for the food that you put on your plate before you shove it into your mouth. It really is that simple in my experience, and yet it can be so hard to take that little step, or to train yourself to take that little step, to just take a breath before you start to eat, or to wake up 5 minutes earlier so that you're not trying to eat on your way to work because you're late, or something like that. So how do you help guide someone to do that when we are raised and sort of pushed and then begin to invest ourselves in these lives which don't nurture us, which take us away from that conversation with ourselves?
I love that you went here because this is something I've really been sitting with myself a lot lately and trying to bring awareness around for myself. And it's really about energy. It all comes back to energy. And so I think I'm not saying that people shouldn't be busy, because I've actually found that in my own life, like I've swum, pendulum has swung both ways. I've gone from being, a very busy school teacher who had something on every night of the week and was out all weekend socializing and doing things, and my schedule was very full, to being someone who was trying to be extremely mindful and meditating every morning and going and getting morning sun in my eyes and taking life really slow. So I did that for a number of years as well. So I've tried both, and really tried to bring in so much mindfulness and practice gratitude every night, and all of the things that we are told are going to help us to regulate our nervous system or calm us down. But essentially, life is busy and the human experience is living it. And so we can't just remove ourselves from living life to and think that that's going to solve all of our problems either, because we are beings who love community and connection too. So we need to be able to do those things. And the reality is we have bills to pay as well. So we need to be able to have our jobs, and sometimes we're not working a job that is the job that we would love to be doing, but it's just the job that we have for now. And so I really think there is this probably the first thing I would suggest to somebody who is feeling really frazzled and busy and, finding it hard to have those moments. Obviously, eating in the car is not ideal, but if that's the time where you get to eat and, that's sometimes all it is, it's about really working on conserving energy and managing our perspective, I would say, because there's a lot of talk about regulating the nervous system, but the nervous system's job is to regulate. It's always working. It's never not working, it's always trying to do its job. And so we have to look at, instead of trying to regulate our nervous system, which is always trying to do its job anyway, what in our environment and what in our perspective is causing it to be in a sympathetic state in the first place. Because we can sit down and meditate all we like, but if we're still in the environment that's going to put us into that sympathetic state, or we've still got those stresses in our life that are going to put us into that state, then it'll only last as far as the meditation finishes or writing your gratitude finishes, because the stimulus is still there that's going to trigger that, feeling of stress or that stress state or that rush state. So I really think it comes back to managing our energy and our main resources in life, which are time, energy, and money. And looking at how the first thing to managing energy is, it all comes back to nutrition, right? Because if we're eating well, we're eating foods that nourish our cells, we sleep better. And sleep is the absolute king. Sleep is priority. It's the number one time when your body heals. It's the number one time when you can repair. It's the number one time when your memories are being stored, and we have psychological repair. We have physical repair. So your gut health can heal in your sleep, but you can't get quality sleep if you're not eating well. So it's really important to develop a good relationship with food. So inviting people to ask, what type of relationship do you have with food? Are you aware? Are you making efforts to eat foods that really nourish you? And people think that to eat healthy, sometimes you have to spend a heap of time in the kitchen. And I also went from doing that to working out how to eat healthy and spending, probably, I would say I have 2 sessions in the kitchen a week where I will cook for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And the rest of my time is spent heating up food in the kitchen or putting together food. And that's not because I'm making little containers of meals in those sessions. It's because I'm bulk prepping protein and I'm bulk prepping other foods. And then I just combine them throughout those next few days. So it'll get me through 3 days where I don't have to cook. And so it's really about developing those values and that connection to food, because that gives us, food not only allows us to sleep better, it also affects our brain chemistry, because if we're eating good foods and we're not eating really processed foods or foods that are going to spike our blood sugars, we're going to be more regulated and stable throughout the day. So ability to connect with the people around us and maintain stable moods is improved. But then it's also going to help you to have good energy levels. If you're eating really balanced food, you're having a really high protein meal to start the day, you will have good energy levels throughout the day. And so when it comes back to really managing that stress and managing the busyness of life and just being able to immerse yourself fully in life without thinking that you have to be, taking so many moments out to meditate and breathe and all of those kind of things, it just comes back to first building a relationship with food so that you have the energy to show up. You're not hungry and grumpy. You're not on a blood sugar roller coaster all day. You haven't got an imbalance in hormones because, you're eating sugar all day to have energy, or having coffee on an empty tummy, which is going to spike cortisol and those kind of things. So food is, I would say, it's at the root of a lot of issues. And then potentially lack of movement too, because if we're not moving, then that's going to create stagnancy in our lymph and in our digestion and all of those kind of things. So, the human body is designed to move, and we are hydrostatic beings, which means all of our body is full of pumps which require movement to work effectively. And so I don't know. I think that I used to, when I first started working with clients, I used to be telling them to do all of those things like write down gratitude every night and all of that stuff. It definitely helps with shifting perspective, you know, but it's still a masculine thing to be doing, to write and journal. Like it's still quite a masculine, it's another doing thing. You're essentially just asking them to do more when in fact, a lot of it comes back to just needing to be and be in the life. And how can you find joy in those moments, and how can you shift your perspective to really enjoy your job that little bit more? If you're not loving going, how can you find that bit more joy there, and not be the victim of your own life, but be the creator of it, and I think to give ourselves the energy to do that, we need to first build a positive relationship with food and realize that that relationship with food is essentially our relationship with ourselves.
That's giving me the feels. I love that. The idea of having a relationship with food is something that would have seemed laughable to me a few years ago. And actually, if you ever ask Hayley about this, she'll tell you we had this question that was going around my group of friends. If you could replace all the food that you would ever eat with a pill that you would take every day, just one pill, and it had a complete, nutritional blanket of everything you needed, and all you had to do was take this one pill with a glass of water, but you could never eat anything again, would you take the pill? And most people that were asked this question, in my experience, say no, hell no, they'd never take the pill. And I was like a hard yes. I was like, I'm going to take that pill, man. Like, I don't want to waste time making food. I don't want to waste money sourcing the food. Like, food was just this huge like suck on my energy and attention. And actually, funnily enough, moving to Canada, this rural area where I live, was a good opportunity for me to connect more with eating locally. There's a lot of farms around here, and I live quite far from a grocery store now. So convenience is no longer available. So you have to be more mindful with food preparation. And it actually is cheaper in a lot of cases to buy really good quality food, really good quality meat and vegetables from farms in bulk than it is to drive to a grocery store and buy that stuff from a grocery store. And I went through this whole like revival of my like relationship with food and appreciation for food, to the point where this last winter, not a lot to do here in the winter, I spent a lot of time cooking, and just myself. Hayley was away in India, I was here for 3 months alone, and I cooked so much, and I loved it. And I started to feel the food giving back to me, not necessarily just physically. I could feel that too, obviously, but energetically, as you say, and spiritually. And the concept of just being instead of doing is actually kind of relevant there, because I was just here alive in this place with nothing going on, and I put so much of my time and energy into preparing and eating, and it was food that was good for me, that I prepared, that I connected with. I touched it with my hands. I'd spoken to the farmer who gave it to me. I had prepared it in various ways, and I would sit down and I'd be damn grateful for it when I got it on the table, and I would be super appreciative of it. And this developed this actual real connection with what I was doing, with kind of how my life had evolved in this way. And there are now days where I'm busy and I don't do that. And there are days when I'm like, fuck it, I'll just eat, peanut butter on toast or whatever. Like, doesn't matter.
Mm.
Or something worse, God forbid, I would do that. But that connection remains, that relationship remains. And I continually have opportunity to appreciate it and even build on it. And it is such a difference in how I live my whole life now, because of this fundamental shift that I had in how I relate to what I put in my body. And I, to your point, like, I feel that I've really experienced that, and I would really highly encourage anybody listening to try to make space for that in their lives in what little way they can, because it's extremely rewarding.
I mean, it's honoring our place in this amazing world that we live in, really, because I think sometimes we get stuck thinking that because of because of the horrible things we know humans have done to the planet, we start to see ourselves as separate to the planet, like to this experience that we're in. And we're not separate. We're just as much a part of it as the plants and the animals, like they are living and breathing, and so are we. And we are all here for a reason. And I think when we develop that relationship with food, we cultivate our relationship with existence, because it is part of our existence is fueling the cells, and everything that we've ever created, any of us in this life, has been created from the energy that was provided to us by food and by our relationship with what the earth has to offer. There's foods out there now that are completely produced in a factory or whatever, but look at what those are doing to our gut health. Like that's the point here, is that if we can really honor our place on this planet and in this existence, like by bringing in foods that were intended for us to eat, we hold a place in the natural order of things just as much as every other, like literally the trees survive based on us breathing. Like how far away can we get from seeing that we are a part of nature? Like we are just as much a part of nature. And so of course there's some pretty horrific practices out there for preparing food, and some pretty horrible farming practices that aren't contributing positively to our environment, but we are also part of the environment. So we need to remember that. Like we're not this separate entity that's on this earth that wasn't meant to be here. We are meant to be here just as much as every other creature on this planet, every other living thing on this planet. So how can we take care of our planet, like our soil and the animals and the plants better, but also honoring our place in the circle of life, and realizing that we can honor our food by consuming food that has been, really understanding, like you said, you're having conversations with the farmers, like where is your food coming from? This development of a relationship with food is a relationship to self and to our whole existence and our whole experience on this earth. And it's also honoring our part in it too. And so if we're thinking, where did our food come from, and making choices with our dollar, like this is coming back to our three key resources, which is time, energy, and money. And it's always about looking at, where are those resources going? Where are we spending them? Where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your energy? And where are you spending your money? Like all of it is our three resources. And sometimes, like you were saying, God forbid, some days, you just pick up what's in front of you and whatever you can have. That is fine. Like I want people to understand that if you develop resilient health and you really do work towards healing the body, and maybe you find someone to help you do that, because, that's what I did. I had other practitioners that I worked with to heal. But when you get to the point where you've developed resilience in your body again, it is okay to be enjoying, the odd indulgence and having a drink of wine and all of those kind of things. Like it's not about depriving ourselves of those things. It's about having the resilience in your body and not tipping the scales so far by consuming them every day to the point that your body is talking to you and telling you this isn't working anymore, and then you've got to balance the scales again. And it's really about nourishing ourselves and looking at where our resources are going and what we're choosing in this life, because we can choose to bring food in that has been ethically, farmed, or where the animals have lived a really beautiful life, or where it's from a regenerative farm where, the animals grazing are giving back and rejuvenating the soil. We've got so many areas of Earth, the planet right now. I think it's like something crazy. And I remember this statistic from when I was teaching, because I used to let a little bit of my own passions filter into my teaching, and my class was learning some different things to other classes. But we were looking at how many different cycles of farm soil turnover there is left on the globe. And it's something shocking, like only 42 or ridiculous amount of seasonal cycles or whatever that was left in some areas due to such poor soil health. And this comes from monocropping. This is huge crops for rice and lentils and peas and grains and soy and all of those things. And it is heavily sprayed and destroying soil and destroying the nutrients. So there's a lot of nutrient void foods growing in those crops. And then it's also trillions of animals and insects that are being killed throughout those farming practices. And there's this misconception that if we just remove a lot of cattle, that's going to save the environment. But in actual fact, cattle has the capacity to restore the soil health. Grazing has the capacity to restore soil health. So without like, I am no expert on any of that, but just having awareness around the fact that our relationship with food and our relationship with what we choose to nourish ourselves with is our relationship to self and our existence and our planet. And it's really looking at how can we make choices that not only make us like we feel good about the choices, but our body feels good about the choices. And, the we can live in harmony with our environment again and just honor our place in that experience. And realizing that through what we eat, we create, our experience here on this earth. Like, I only have the energy to create all of the things that I'm doing with our women's health program and try to help all of the women that I'm trying to help because of the food I'm choosing to eat. If I went back to the food I was eating in my 20s when I was at uni and I went back to the way I ate then, I would not have the energy or even the emotional regulation to support other people, because that was a roller coaster for me, and I had some of the worst digestive issues ever. And I was eating things like McDonald's and pizza and like just absolute, now that I look back at it, I'm like, whoa, completely nutrient void foods. No wonder I had barely a cycle, and no wonder I had moods all over the place and poor digestion. But it's just, there's so much more to this thing of eating, It's not as simple as just like, I'm just picking foods to eat. And I think when we're little, like, we're not really taught what food does. We're told to eat everything on our plate, and we're told veggies help us grow and be strong when protein helps us grow and be strong. Like, I don't know what we're told when we're kids, but you grow up believing all that stuff, and you grow up like, I used to eat 4 bits of toast with Vegemite on it for breakfast every morning. Like, that was my breakfast. And then I was going to school and learning. And then at lunch I was having a bread roll. Like, it's just carbs all day. And not really much protein to support me to grow. And my parents were doing the best they could. They're doing what the ads on TV and the news is telling them to do, like these convenience foods, good for kids, and like cereal, which is just like a sugar storm. And it's just, kids are just told that eating is about being full, and listen to your body when you're full, like that's when you're finished eating. But it's not like the food that you eat, it's not about being full. It's about creating cells, like creating healthy skin, hair, nails, organ function. Like, it's about healthy digestion. Food is about nourishing your body so that you can then show up with energy. And then it's also so that you can create in this life. Like, it's just giving back to what has created for you, you know?
Yeah, how you relate to your food is how you relate to self. How you relate to self is how you relate to the world. Like, in a lot of ways, it is so simple and so beautiful, and of course, so right. Like, this kind of thing that I want, once those pieces fall into place, I hear that, or I hear you say that to me, and I say it back to you, and there's a part of me that just intuitively knows that that is the way, and it is that simple. And to circle back, that means then you have to disconnect from the hustle, the pace, the media, the speed, the existential crisis of being alive in 2025, all that kind of stuff. But
Mm.
if you can do it, then you can start to really, like you said, create and perhaps fulfill, or begin to conceptualize and fulfill whatever it is that you are on earth to do.
And I think, like a client actually asked me earlier in the week, what would be, what are my main habits? Like, if I was, when I was healing, or what would be my main habit for someone who was on their healing journey to help them? Like, what would I tell them? And most of the time, like, past me would have said, when I first started out on this journey as a health coach, I would have said, make sure you're drinking filtered water, make sure you're getting 9 hours of sleep, make sure you're moving your body every day, like the basic human needs. But now, in creating a business myself and working massive hours and really, like, sometimes 7 days a week, I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it. I love what I'm doing. But how am I maintaining the level of energy to go into that and still get to the gym every day and still cook food and still show up and connect with family and all of those things? I would say the one habit that I would recommend for anyone to do is just to look at where your energy is going for a start. Like, really do a little bit of an energy audit every week. So if that's the one thing that you were going to do is reflect on the choices that you're making for your energy, again, that's that one of those resources. So if you can develop that good relationship with food and start really paying attention to what foods you're bringing in, and that's something that you're nailing already, but you're still feeling like I'm eating well, I'm doing all the right things, but still I don't feel good, and I'm busy and I'm stressed and all of that. It's really just about looking at where that energy is going and how can you bring it back in to you. That's your most valuable resource. Time, energy, money. These are our resources. Like, if we can get back to just remembering that these are our resources, when one of those resources is low and depleted, how do we feel? If money's really low, how do we feel? And then, do we reflect on where it's going? Like, are we looking at what we really need in our life and what we don't need? Are we looking at how we could perhaps get more? Like, can I just work another little job that would bring more of this resource in so that I don't feel so stressed? Can I change the circumstances of where I live so that I don't feel so stressed? And then looking at time, like, where is my time going? Am I just getting up every day and just moving through the motions without ever reflecting on where my time's going? Am I spending 2 hours scrolling on social media, which is then, feeding into that stress? And I think I'm zoning out and resting while I'm doing that, but in actual fact, it's a stressor as well. So it's looking at how much time am I giving to that? And what am I doing in my spare time? Like, this is a resource that we have. How is it being used? And then energy. Think about when you feel like you've got no time, like how that feels. So how can we look at creating more time or using our time more efficiently? And then looking at that resource of energy. Where is it going? What am I choosing to give my energy to? Like, I'm lucky enough that I am reflecting on this all the time. This is the key one, looking at where my energy is going. Like, our body's like a battery. There are things that drain us. Catching up with people that perhaps are negative is going to drain us. If you're in a state where you're feeling symptoms or like you need to heal, or you need some type of healing, or you've got a lot of stress in your life, it might mean temporarily not giving your energy to those people or these, certain situations or social media, but it doesn't have to be forever. Like, I think there's this fear of, if I don't catch up with that person for a couple of weeks or for a month or for 2 months, that's the end. It's a snip. But it doesn't have to be so dramatic. We can just have times in our lives where we're bringing all of our resources back in and protecting them, so that we can use those resources to then fill our own cup and allow them to regenerate, so to speak, like really protecting our time and bringing our time back to us, protecting our funds by perhaps saving for a little bit so that we don't feel that stress, protecting our energy for a little while and not letting it leak out into all these little distractions. And this, for me, it was always like this next course I've signed up to. I was like, okay, knowledge is something I crave. So I could get distracted by signing up to this next course and this next course. And then I'm like, okay, no more courses, just for a bit. But that doesn't mean I can't ever do another course for the rest of my life. No more going out for drinks on the weekend. That doesn't mean I can't ever do that again. It's just about looking at how we're currently feeling, and if that isn't 100%, where can I bring my valuable resources back in and protect my energy so that I can, that would be my number one tip now for anyone. And that's because that was my greatest lesson, was I could be nailing all the right things. I could be the most rigid I'd ever been in my eating. I could be, moving my body on this strict schedule. But if I wasn't looking at where my energy was going and where I was giving back to myself in terms of happiness, like, it's so important that we also give back to ourselves in terms of happiness and what makes us happy too.
Yeah, there's a prevailing idea, I think, behind the understanding of balance, work-life balance, life balance. People who, generally speaking, I seem to see that people who strive to achieve balance have this idea that they need to get everything balanced in a single 24-hour day. Today I have to exercise, meditate, journal, spend time with my family, take my dog for a walk, do 8 hours of deep work on my freelance side gig, call my mom, cook delicious food, and get 8.5 hours of sleep. That's modern day work-life balance. And yet, if you can extrapolate that across a month or 6 months or a
Mm.
year, it starts to get a lot easier because, for example, even just taking physical exercise, even in the 6 months of 2025, there have been periods where I have done far less physical exercise and periods where I've done far more, and I don't stress about it. I'm not trying to achieve a certain output every day, 365 days of the year. But people seem to get, and I have done this myself, people get caught up that, oh, for me to achieve work-life balance, I need to be doing all the things all at once. But it doesn't work like that. And it's far easier to allow more of an ebb and a flow, more of a kind of tied in, tied out, exactly like what you were speaking about. Is that
Mm.
something that you try to help guide your clients to see or perhaps unlearn with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's just unrealistic to try and fit all of those things into one day. And I know because I've done it, and it resulted in probably the most stressed I've been in the last, I guess, probably the last 10 years. The most stressed I ever felt was when I was trying to do it all perfectly. And that was actually at the start of my own health coaching journey because I was trying to embody everything. I was like, if I'm going to coach anyone else, if I'm going to be the best women's health coach I can be, I have to be embodying it all perfectly. And so I was literally trying to get that morning sun, get in meditation, have a good home cooked breakfast with the right amount of protein and everything, and then get to the gym. Like just all of those things that we're being told are what we need to do to be optimally healthy. And I love the term that you said, ebb and flow, because that's what it needs to be more of. It needs to be an ebb and a flow, but we can't honor the ebb and the flow until we're willing to bring awareness to our day and until we evaluate, until we reflect on how we're going. So it's so important. Let's say for someone who's listening, they may have a goal that they're trying to achieve, or even when New Year's rolled around, we've all got these New Year's resolutions that we set and these goals that we're trying to achieve for the new year coming. And a lot of them just disappear, right? Like we're like, oh, why didn't I achieve that goal? It never happened. And this has been me before. And it's because if we focus on the goal or the outcome, then we're always going to feel like we're failing until we nail it. And we're not really setting ourselves up for success. And that's in teaching, we used to call it scaffolding, like scaffolding the children to success. And that's like we pick the goal at the end of term, like what are they going to achieve this term? And then the lessons build up towards that. And it's really intentional, like in the classroom, like intentional building upon something to get to the goal. But then as adults, it's like we almost forget that. And I guess we're never shown that that's the way that teaching is occurring in the room. But majority of the kids get there. If scaffolding's done really well and it meets the individual where they're at, majority of the kids will reach the goal. And the goal should be for them, not an overall goal of every child in the classroom. This is another little bone to pick that I have with some education systems. But in terms of adults and like just clients that I'm working with and just the individual, your goal will be a goal for you, and it could be to do with your health, and it could be to do with what you're trying to achieve in business. It could be to do with any aspect of your life. Relationships, I don't think enough people have goals for their relationships, to improve at that relationship. And it's really about creating steps that are going to give us little, instead of expecting ourselves to jump over a big canyon and get to the goal, we've got little steps along the way that will get us there. And those little steps, we can reflect and show progress in what we're doing. So if life is busy and chaotic, and you just really want to improve your health, and there's something in particular like a symptom or whatever it is that you're trying to overcome or reach, instead of trying to fit everything into every day, it's just about picking one step for. I love how you said, could we extrapolate that into 6 months or a year? Yes, we can. It doesn't all have to happen in 24 hours. It can be a week, it can be a month, it can be a year. But and I used to be someone who was like, everything has to happen overnight or I'm failing, like I need to see the result immediately, or how do I know if I'm successful at it? And when I learned that it could be a year-long goal, it could be a 6-month-long goal, like giving yourself that permission slip to take time to get somewhere, especially when we factor in, if you're reflecting on the time where your time is going and you look at what amount of time you actually have left in the week. I don't think enough people do this. Like I literally did this on a Google sheet where I put in the hours of my week and the days of my week, and I did a color-coded grid to see where my time goes. And when I did that, I was like, wow, I have so many blocks here where I could be fitting in things that I want to do or I want to achieve, or rest, where I could just be like, zoning out, like actually just reading a book that I love or something. It gave me a sense of freedom. So I think there's like this paradox. Structure actually creates freedom. If you've got no routine or structure or no plan for your week or no schedule for your week, everything feels like it needs to happen at the same time and you're trying to remember it all in your head. It can be really stressful. Whereas if we put down what we need to do each day and we allow ourselves to space that over the year, like you were suggesting, 6 months or a year, we realize we actually only need the energy to do the next thing. We only need the energy to do the very next thing in this moment. And that's it. We don't need, and that in itself, that shift in perspective can reduce stress in the body and support digestion, like reduce all of the stress in the body, because all of a sudden it doesn't feel like we've got no time and so much to do. We realize this is the time I'm in right now, and this is the thing I have to do. And all I need is to do this. And then I do this, and then I do this, and then it's just so much more peaceful, So I think reflecting is such a powerful thing to be doing, and looking at where our energy is, again, back to the resources. Like it's always back to look where our time and energy is going, and realizing that it doesn't all have to happen overnight, and giving ourselves achievable steps towards the goal so that we can celebrate progress. Because that's what it's all about. It's just making progress, not about getting to the finish line.
That is one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned from tree planting, one step at a time. No, maybe 8 tree planting seasons, I think. And, there were days where I planted 5,000 trees. At the start of the
Mm.
day, it seems an insurmountable thing that you could possibly do. And then you just begin and you just do one at a time, and you do that all day. And at the end of the day, you've done the thing. And, talking about looking at a long-term goal or extrapolating that idea over a longer period of time, I think people who have experience in starting their own businesses or starting their own big projects, having done it at least once, I think understand that. All you have to do is do the next thing and keep doing it and be mindful. And for me, podcasting is one of those things. I mean, this is a relatively new journey for me. In case to my listeners at the start, when I said I had hundreds of thousands of listeners, I do not. This is a very, it's a new beginnings. And when I started, it was the first time in my life where I'd started a creative project where I really just didn't put a time frame on it or a really a strong measure of success that needed to be reached in 6 months or a year. I just put this the goal was to enjoy it, and the goal was to just move through it one step at a time and learn and get better and do this thing that I love and have these conversations and just take it from there. And it was so refreshing, and like you said, it's brought such a wonderful layer of enjoyment to something that I couldn't have anticipated because it wasn't so progress orientated. That's not to say that I don't have goals, and it's not to say that I don't work hard, but again, it is just do the next thing, film the next episode, contact the next guest, refine the next step, and so on and so on and so on. And I do feel that it's a good lesson for many things that we can do in our lives, is to just do them one step at a time and allow the sort of path to unfold. You can predict things. You can predict that 7 steps ahead, I'm going to have to do something in a specific way, but you can only ever really do that one thing at a time. I love that you said that.
I love how you said the goal is just to enjoy it. Imagine if our goal was just to enjoy life. Like really, it comes down to we do get caught up. Like all of us. Like maybe not everybody. Like I don't want to generalize and speak for. There could be someone listening who hasn't got caught up in the stress of life and just the
Good for them.
and that's excellent. But I do feel like we forget to just have the goal of enjoying it, enjoying things along the way. And I think that can come from wanting to do a good job. Like when we put that pressure on ourselves to want things to be successful or want to do well, or there can be that financial pressure as well. But it's really just about trying to come back to ask yourself, how can I enjoy this more? Like, how could I enjoy, what aren't you enjoying in your life right now? Is it necessary to keep doing that? And if it is, how can you enjoy it more? But I also really love the analogy of tree planting, because it's kind of like, I mean, it's a metaphor really for life, isn't it? Because it's like you just had to begin. And if we could just begin, there's so many things that people dream of doing and that people want to achieve in this life, and they just don't begin. And imagine if we did, like, just one step in front of the other and moving towards whatever it is, and just one thing at a time, and knowing I've just got to plant this tree and then the next tree and then the next tree. And then at the end of the day, like, all the trees are just planted and you've got this beautiful, product that you've created. So I really love when you brought up tree planting, because I just feel like that is the perfect example of progress towards a goal where you just need the energy to do the next thing.
I think just beginning is something that I've struggled with in my life because I have been more principally motivated by fear of failure than by desire for success. And having been performance orientated for a lot of my life, what that usually meant is that if I couldn't roadmap a direct path to success, that was very intimidating, and so I often wouldn't start. And there are several key examples I can think of in my life where I have done that. This podcast was almost one of them, and getting to this point was a huge hurdle and a huge unlearning. And I wonder how many examples there are in my life that I can't remember because I just did it as a habit without, like, so subconsciously, because I was so controlled by fear of being bad at something or fear of not being able to validate myself through my desired achievement, that it just never got off the ground. And I don't have the answer, and I'm not particularly hung up about it. But to your point, the world would be, I feel, remarkably more joyful if everybody just started.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people would be able to relate to what you're saying, in that fear of wanting to begin something because what if it doesn't work, and all the what ifs. And I think a lot of it comes down to, I mean, our ability to create is infinite. Human beings, right? Like, you've seen, we witness all around us, like, all of the things that have been created, and there is a difference between those who just create and create fearlessly. Like, a fear is, I guess, there's always a level of fear that prevents how much we create. And I think it all comes down to, when so much of it comes down to, not all of it, because again, I don't want to generalize too much. This is just my opinions on things and my perspective on this life and this experience. But I was in a classroom with children who were 6 years old for 4 years, like, taught over, that would be over 80 kids that were, under the age of 6. And then I moved up to kids that were 12 years old and I taught them for 6 years plus. And so that's a lot of human beings. And in that time, my biggest goal was to work out how to connect with each of them and how to help them believe in themselves. And so it was really interesting, because there were children who started at 5 and 6 years old who weren't willing to give it a go when they first came in because they were afraid of failure. There was kids, I remember a girl that I taught, and this is going back, like, I don't want to admit, like, maybe 15, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe. And she was really quite bright when she started school. She already had a good amount of skills, like fine motor skills, holding a pencil, all of that kind of thing. But she was really afraid of writing because she wanted it to be perfect. And when she would make a mistake, so I would encourage her to write in her own time, like, take her time, have a go. And when she would make a mistake, she would cry because she'd be devastated that she made a mistake. And so building up her resilience was like a really big goal for me, getting her to feel like making a mistake is okay. And so we had a lot of little mottos in the classroom about making mistakes, and that, maybe, and I've heard one recently that was like, what if you were guaranteed success on the 20th after your 20th failure? And
I
how
love that.
quickly then would you want to get through all the failures? And it'd be like, oh, you'd be powering through all those failures if you knew, oh, no, once I get to 20, I actually win. Like, I get it. It's the perfect, I get success when I get to 20. And then you wouldn't care so much about the failure. But it's the unknown like when will I get it? And then also it's comparison. Like there's a lot of comparison that goes on, especially for men too. Comparison's a big one for men, and that simply comes back to survival instincts in their environment. If you were going out hunting, right, you're looking for something that's different and out of place in the environment. So you're comparing everything around you to look for a threat and look for something in your environment that is out of the norm, so that you can report that to the tribe and be the one who's passing on the news. Like, essentially that's like the news from way back when. Um,
Mhm.
but I think in all that time of teaching kids, there were children who came in and they would just give everything a red hot go. And that's what we used to call it. Sorry, I just realized that was such a teaching. Give it a red hot go. I don't know if that's an Australian thing. Is it?
It's an Australian thing for sure.
Well,
There's
they
your
would
there's your
try really
Aussieism.
hard. Yeah. It just means, I guess, to explain that for anyone who doesn't know what red hot go is, it just means they would have a really good try at it without worrying about the outcome. And imagine if we could all do that in everything we did, like really just try and not worry about the outcome. And so we really started to celebrate. I created a culture where we celebrated effort and trying instead of the result. So instead, I wouldn't give praise when they did everything perfectly and when they got it all right. I would give praise for them trying. So I was conditioning the classroom to receive praise when they had a go. And that was completely different. And so I think when we're children, if we're constantly being praised for getting something right, which does happen in so many classrooms, and it might be every year of your schooling life, you were praised for getting things right. How are you going to be as an adult? You're going to be hoping that you're going to get things right. Otherwise, where will you receive that love, that praise, that acknowledgement? Because especially if it's an unknown. So in the classroom, often we're like, there's an answer. So it's like a tick if you get it right. As an adult, no one's ticking your work. Like no one's giving you a sticker, like sometimes we get an award for something, but there's not always that clear evidence of you did it. You're successful. You're right. So it's a bit of a gray area. So if we don't know what success looks like, we don't have an example, then sometimes it can be really hard to motivate ourselves to want to try, because we're not sure that we'll get it right, and we won't get that tick, and we won't get that acknowledgement or that feedback. And so I think if we spent our whole lives being conditioned to just put in effort and that's where the praise would come from, we would have a whole different whole different world, and workers would be completely different. And celebration would be again in the progress, in the efforts, instead of in it all being perfect at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we would enjoy those steps along the journey far more rather than just trying to catapult our way past them. I thought about this a lot actually in the context of when someone sets out to get a degree versus when someone sets out to start their own business and to create their own successful business. When I went to university, there was a clear path. I had to go to a certain amount of classes and I had to apply a certain amount of effort and I had to achieve certain grades. And every time I submitted a paper and I got it back, I was a percentile point closer to overall completion. And it was just so easy to measure where I was versus the end result. Compare that to, starting my own business, becoming a freelance editor and writer, podcaster, you name it, compare it to your business or anyone's business. There is no measurable end goal that you don't create. And there's no way of knowing how close you are to it other than by having already reached the step which you don't necessarily know how to get to. So if you want to make $1 million a year,
Mm.
you're not closer to it until you get to the end of the year and you're like, oh, I made a hundred grand this year. And then you look at the vast gap between where you are and where you want to be, and you're like, how the hell do I get there?
Yeah,
And what's all this empty space in between?
you don't
And
really
it's
know what you're doing.
incredibly exactly, and it's incredibly intimidating. And I truly think that gray space, if you can operate in the unknown, if you can continue to operate and work really hard when no one is watching and nobody is praising you and no one's waving the flag, that's the difference between, or that is one of the key markers of someone who will reach their desired level of success, is their ability to continuously operate in out of sight of an audience, out of sight of the people who may praise them, and without reward. And if you do that for long enough, and you are reactive to your environment, and you learn from your mistakes, and you capitalize on your successes, you will eventually make it. But you have to be able to hold the discomfort. And we're not, in my experience, we're not programmed to hold discomfort well at all. I think we literally, like, if I fail, I feel like I'm dying. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. It's like failure is literally like, if you trace this all the way back to like what you were talking about, tribalism, fail enough times and you get kicked out of the tribe and you literally die because you don't have your tribe to protect you anymore. I honestly feel like failure feels like fear of death at the same
Mm.
time, and like, if and that's hard. That's a
It
really
sounds
hard
like
thing to
some
reconcile.
ancestral trauma there. Like something has happened in a past life.
Oh, definitely, for sure.
Mm.
Talk to me about being of service and what that means to you.
Okay, that's I mean, they're all big questions, aren't they? I'm like, is this going to be a big answer? Because I don't know. I haven't. Let's see what comes through. So, being of service, it feels like purpose to me. I feel like there's a little bit of a misconception around purpose, though, and purpose. People think like it's something that you're going to find, like you discover your purpose in life. Well, I guess that's quite true as well. Like I find purpose in more like I accidentally stumbled upon it, and it was just by following what I love and what lights me up, following my interests. And if I didn't know what I wanted to do, because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left school. So I think this is really important for people to hear as well. Like, not everybody wakes up when they're 5 years old and knows they want to be a doctor and then becomes a doctor. Like, I got to 18 and I didn't know what I wanted to be. And so I picked teaching because I liked kids. So I think this is really important to know about, like, in regards to discovering your purpose. I just picked teaching because I like kids, and school holidays sounded good. And then I started teaching and I fell in love with it because I found a way to make it my own. The things that I didn't necessarily agree with, like telling kids that maths and English is the most important thing in the world for them to learn. Like, as long as they tried, again, I created a community of children who celebrated trying. And then I created a community of children who collaborated. They didn't have to work on their own. Like, I ask my niece every time she leaves school, did you help anyone with their work today? She goes, no, we have to do our own work. And I'm like, oh, that's not the kind of classroom that I wanted to create. I always told the kids, you can help each other every single day, but when we do a test, we have to do it on our own so that I get to see what's missing and then we can fill the gaps. That's basically how I run the classroom. And they would all help each other with their work all the time. And I loved it. And they loved it. I'm not the only person in the room that can show them how to do something. That's how I felt. It's how I feel with our clients too. Like, I want them to be able to support each other. So I kept teaching. I found a way to really love it. And then I moved to a different state and the system was very different. And suddenly it was too rigid and I couldn't do the style of teaching I was doing anymore. The kids had to be fit into a little box. There was a lot of labels in the state that I moved to. And I realized I can't do this anymore. It was pretty soul destroying. And I moved away from teaching. But I asked myself again, what am I interested in? What would I like next? And so I really loved exercise. That's something, discovering fitness and nutrition my health journey started in my second year of teaching when I was really moody and really lacked energy. And I'm teaching 5-year-olds and I'm like, I need better energy. So that's when I started eating really healthy and started exercising every day, like moving my body every day. And that changed my ability to teach and show up in the classroom. I was a much more energetic and happy, healthy teacher. And then I introduced all of those things into my classroom and I started doing fitness with my kids as well. And they loved it. They would write, oh, the morning fitness helps me to concentrate and helps me to feel warm for the day in winter when it's 0 degrees. And so then I moved into fitness after that. I studied PT and I felt like this isn't enough. I need to know more. So I moved into holistic lifestyle coaching and nutrition. I felt like this isn't enough. I need to know more. And so I moved into functional medicine and functional blood analysis and learning about the body in a really functional way. And through all of that, it was always the intention to give back. like we thought always the intention was to absorb this knowledge and see how I could help somebody else with it. And so being of service to me always felt really natural, like it felt instinctual. My mum even jokes that as a kid, I was the only one that would help her with anything when she needed to use the computer or send an email or whatever it was, the only one with patience. And that's because I always felt like if I know how to do something, or if I understand something and I can help somebody else to do that or understand it in a way that makes things easier for them, it just made sense. It made sense for me to do that. I never had a second thought on that. And like my whole life, I feel like it's been a journey of trying to work out the most efficient way to do everything because I love efficiency, but the most enjoyable way as well. And so passing that knowledge on just felt really easy. So I think the teacher exists within me anyway, like it just always has. And so this was just a new way to be the teacher. And being of service really to me is just sharing that knowledge and those skills with people who perhaps are looking for that guidance. And yeah, it was just I really found purpose in that. And I think I find purpose in so much in helping women with that because it was my journey as well. Like I worked really hard to change my habits and change my lifestyle, going from someone who was like a real partier, not eating well, drinking every weekend, highly social, all of those things. Like it took a lot of trial and error and and a lot of failures to work out how to change those habits and really support myself and really learn to love myself. Like that was part of teaching as well. In the classroom, if I wanted those children to be able to feel safe and comfortable and to really feel accepted, I had to learn to accept myself. I knew that was one of the first things that I would have to do and really learn to appreciate who I am as a person and think about who I wanted to be. So I used to always ask them that question at the start of the year. How do you want to be remembered this year in this class? Do you want to be remembered as somebody who was not nice to be in a classroom with? Because that's the reality of school. You remember the kids that weren't great to be in a classroom with. Or I'd say, do you want to be remembered as someone who was really helpful or someone who was kind and considerate or someone who was really accepting of everyone in the room? And they would all sit down and we'd pull up all these personality traits and we'd reflect on that. But to do that, I had to do it for myself as well. And so I think, again, to answer your question, big long answer, I think being of service to me really means supporting others to live their best life. It just developed in my time of teaching that I really made an effort to learn to uncover that potential and that bright spark in every single child in my room. And I still want to do that for the rest of my life with everybody that I meet, everyone that asks for it, because I also learned a powerful lesson in my life is to wait to be invited to give that information. The right people who seek advice and who seek that knowledge will come and they will ask for it. People don't need you to tell them what to do and unless they're asking. Like no one wants to be told what to do with their life by someone they haven't asked for that from. And so the people that do find their way to me, the women that do find their way, and even men like that I've had conversations with before, like if they're seeking some sort of support, it feels like my mission to give it, if I can help in any way. So I guess being of service to me is helping people to come back to the magic that exists within themselves.
So today you predominantly work with women, and you've said to me before that you work to help women essentially just get more out of their lives, starting with foundational practices like nutrition and health. Women's health, I think, has been dominated to its detriment by men historically, by men who have told women what they should feel or what they should be feeling based on a lot of studies that were done on men. And that's the whole thing that we don't need to go into. And I think I personally believe it's never been more important for women to be in control of their own health. And I think what you're doing and a lot of other wonderful women are doing is really helping with that. And at the same time, many women have important men in their lives, whether that's partners, friends, brothers, fathers. And so, what I'd love to know is, what do you think is the best way, or how can the men that are in women's lives best support them when they're on their own health journeys? How can they show up for them in a way that's going to empower them?
This is a beautiful question, I think, because men do have a really powerful role to play in their partners' health journeys and in their mothers and their sisters and their daughters' health journeys. And I think sometimes men don't understand how valuable they are in that, and how much how important they can be in that. And I think it's often because they're not really sure what is needed of them or what is required of them in that journey. And I also think they forget to ask, as well. And sometimes we go through life and we just forget to ask each other what we need. And I guess because Jace, my partner, is, we work together as a team and he's a women's health coach too. Along that time, he's really been able to develop his skills in supporting me and the women that we work with. And he's quite amazing at it, really. But he always asks, what do you need from me? Is there anything I can do for you right now? And at first, when he started asking me that, the answer was always no, because women often feel like they have to do everything for themselves. And we have this little story like, if I don't do it, it won't get done. I have to do it all for myself. And a lot of that comes from our mothers, because our mothers did do it all. There's so many women that I know whose mothers were responsible for everything in the household. And I think times have changed a little bit, and I think we did get stuck for a while there trying to go for 50-50. We share everything, we do everything 50-50. Women can do all the same things as men and all of that kind of thing. But we were also seeing how that doesn't work, like women's bodies aren't designed to do the same thing every single day of the month. Like we're not designed to show up with the same amount of energy every day of the month. And men have a different kind of cycle. Theirs is more like a daily cycle. Their energy throughout the day changes. And so I think it's really important for men and women to have conversations around what they need. It's funny because Jace is actually developing a little ebook around this, around how to support your partner through her cycle and how while she's healing from a men's perspective. So I think it's going to be a little bit jovial. Like I think there's going to be a bit of humor in there that might be perhaps triggering for me, even if I read it. But he laughs about it. Like he says things like, I'm going to add into this, if she's on the first few days of her bleed, don't eat treats around her unless you have enough for her too. And I kind of just laugh because I'm like, oh, this is gold. Actually, this is going to be so good, for him to create this. But things like, if your partner is on their healing journey and it's important to understand first where she's at in her cycle throughout that is going to impact her energy, the foods, the amount of calories she needs, the foods that she eats, like how she's feeling. And there's a lot of what happens throughout the cycle that it's all outside of our control. How balanced our cycle is within our control, because it comes down to nourishment and rest and all of that. But the hormones our hormones impact our moods and all of that kind of thing as well. So we can't just be happy all the time. And I think for men to understand that your woman literally can't just be happy all the time, like that's a huge thing as well. But just asking, getting into conversation, I would say that is the most powerful thing a man can do to support a woman on her healing journey, is to ask what she needs. And I think the most important thing a woman can do is hand some of it over. Like be okay with your man doing some things for you, or the men in your life supporting you. If there are men in your life that feel supportive, like allow them to take something on, because often if you give a man a job to do and you tell him what you want it to look like, be more explicit on what success looks like, because like you were saying, if you knew what success looked like, you wouldn't be so afraid to have a go. Like they will often do it. And then it's only going to create this wondrous experience for both of you. Because I think for a man, I'm a woman, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can feel really lit up by a job well done, you know? And
For
so,
sure.
but having a measurement for what that looks like makes it so much less stressful. So if a woman said to you, I really need you to cook, I don't have the energy, but this is how I want it cut up, and this is how I want it to go. Like, this is what I want it to look like on the plate. suddenly you're like standing there making dinner, not worried you're doing it wrong, like not worried that you've cut the carrot in the wrong way or whatever it is. Like, because women can sometimes be particular and fussy in that way. And they've learned how to look after themselves and make food for themselves in a way that they know they enjoy. And so if they're like, it can be hard to surrender control over if they're worried the job won't get done well. So I think for a man, being okay with asking, how do you want it done? For a start, and not being like, okay, I'm going to do it, but as long as you let me do it my way, because that's all of a sudden it's like, well, what's the fucking point letting you do? I don't know if I'm allowed to say on this, but all of a sudden it's like, what's the point letting you do this if you're just going to do it and I'm not going to like it anyway? So I think it's really important to also for the woman to practice surrender and being more flexible too. Like, it's not going to be exactly how we like things done, but it's for women, there's just so many responsibilities every day, all the decision making, so many decisions. And that's not to say there aren't supportive men out there that do that in their household, because I know that there are. But for a woman who is stressed, often they're the ones that are seeking support for their health because there is an imbalance in their life and they need to bring those resources, that energy back in, that time and energy needs to come back in. So if a partner who's trying to support a female in that situation wants to be supportive, how can I create more time and energy for her by taking some things off her plate? Then it's also asking, how do you want it done? I think that's a really important, and being okay with asking that and what do you need from me? Like, just conversation can be really powerful there.
Okay, wonderful. Tennielle, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the Journey podcast with me. I've enjoyed every second of this conversation and I really appreciate your wisdom. Where can people find you if they would like to learn more about what you do?
So, first off, I just want to say thank you for having me on. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you. And I've really loved this conversation as well. And I feel like what you're doing is going to give people a lot of opportunity to hear from, I don't know, some different perspectives. And I think life is about being exposed to different perspectives. I think sometimes podcasts are the only way we're talking to people that aren't the people we talk to every other day. And so it's a way of expanding our thinking. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of that. For people who are listening, you can find me on Instagram at healing.her.health, or we have our website, which is howcoolshealth.com/healingher.
And of course, speaking of podcasting, quick shout out to your podcast, Women Who Dream, which I highly recommend checking out. It's very good.
Thank you very much. It's also very fresh and was nearly didn't happen as well, for fear of failure. But again, it's just, for me, it was the same thing as you, like just choosing to do it for enjoyment and just beginning.
That's it, just beginning. All right, Tennielle, I'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Journey podcast. For links and information about today's episode, check out the show notes below. If you'd like to support this podcast, the easiest and most impactful way to do so is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review or comment. Or please share your favorite episodes with friends, family, or on social media. That's also incredibly helpful. If you'd like to get in touch or you'd like to read my book, Last Train North, the easiest way to get into all of that is at my website, matthewchanner.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, enjoy the journey.